Throughout this course, I am going to be sharing with you an array of practices which really do help us address some of the critical needs that many of us or the people we might be working with might be facing. There's this profound saying that, simple as it is that if your only tool is a hammer, every problem looks like a nail. And while it is true that meditation, in a very general way, is positive and helpful to almost all conditions, but not all, but most conditions, certainly, meditation is helpful. Almost any practice people do, where they take the time to collect their attention, to calm their nervous system, to turn a bit away from the world and to interrupt a movement of mind, that's going to be beneficial. However, it doesn't necessarily speak to the idea of how do we have the greatest impact in the most effective way, the most efficient way possible. And to do that, I will be sharing with you an array of practices and techniques that I learned and I've shared throughout the years and that have had huge impact in my life and huge impact of the people I've worked with. That tradition is Tantra. And there are, fortunately now, talking, even using the word Tantra doesn't necessarily have the same associations that it did 20 years ago, but ever so briefly, I'd rather not spend a lot of time on it because there's a specific context here. So Tantra is both a philosophy and a system of methods specifically utilized to help us embody that philosophy. And what is the philosophy in a nutshell? We can go into some very simple suggestions, very simple precepts about it, but just so you have an orientation to it. Number one is probably most important, and that is life is inherently precious. We could even say life is sacred. And so if that's the understanding of life, and yet so many of us live our life unaware of the sacred, what tantric methodology suggests is that there are certain limiting factors in our perception, in the way we move through the world, in the kind of dullness that begins to occur in the mind. It's conditioning. We could even say carelessness, habituation, that begins to cloud our ability to commune and to see life as inherently sacred. So what that says is that Tantra then is all about providing methodologies that allow us to see and experience life as inherently sacred. These are just a couple of the precepts that I'm going to offer that give you some basis for understanding this tantric approach and the specific technologies that I'll borrow in this course to provide you with a variety of techniques that speak to very specialized needs. In addition to the principle or the precept that life is sacred, there's this idea that the body is itself a universe. And so as this micro universe called our body exists, its condition determines our experience of the condition of the outer universe. And I don't think that seems particularly complicated. We know even in CBT, which is cognitive behavioral therapy, we know that this is one of the most effective kinds of therapy that exists. It suggests that what we feel and what we think and what we do affects our world, and how we see the world is very much determined by what we think, do, and feel. And so depending on the conditioning, we could even say the unique landscape of our body, we perceive the world on the basis of that. Change the way the body is, whether it's looking at the physical aspects of the body, the mental aspects, or even the emotions, and we can change the way we see the world. However, Tantra now begins to turn its focus to a unique aspect of this body, which is the microcosm of the macrocosm, right? And what it looks at specifically is life force, prana Shakti, the activated forces within you. Because it says that the way what it says is that as our energy is, our thoughts follow suit. In other words, if you really want to change how you see the world, one of the most profound, and we could even say most immediate ways we can change the way we see the world is change the breath. We know that. That's physiological. That's clinical. We know that. That's not complicated. The breath is but one, and it is the material manifestation of our energy body. Your body is an amalgam of, we'll say, energy fields, energy pathways. There's 72,000 in the body. This is what the teachings tell us. There's 14 other main ones within, 14 main ones within that 72,000. Within that, there's 3 that are most important. We'll get to all of these other elements because they are relevant in some, depending upon our aims of meditation. So the precept is that our thought follows energy. Change your energy and you'll change the way you think. That sounds simple. Maybe it doesn't. Maybe it sounds like a fantasy. However, I think once you begin to apply it, you realize the profound truth within it. But not only does our thought follow our energy, but also energy follows thought. That means that when I begin to direct my mind to a portion of my body, to a center within my body, to a word, to an attitude, I'm energizing it. We could even say that what carries my mind to the thing I am focused on, I'll say it again, the thing that carries the mind to the object upon which I am focusing is energy. So by focusing, I gather and collect energy, right? But what if I collected my energy? In fact, this teaching even goes a little further to suggest that when someone is distracted, that what they're experiencing is the dispersion of their own energy, and that when they collect their energy, their mind will be more collected. So this is quite an interesting and unique approach that we find in Tibetan Tantra, in many Taoist practices, which are all just Tantra having evolved in different parts of the world. Mostly I draw from what we could call Hindu Tantra, although that's not my favorite way of looking at it. We'll call it part of the Himalayan tradition, which is where Tantra indeed thrived initially. All right, so last couple things. Tantra says you were born with and you live under certain limiting factors. What are those limiting factors? It depends on your point of view. If you come from the East, there's a good chance that you put all your faith in astrology, although that some of that culture and belief and worldview has come into the West as well, which is that we are just simply playing out the stars. On the other hand, if you have a more psychological background, you lean into things like your parents. This then, or collective consciousness. These are the things that are limiting our perception, or family dynamic, you could say. And so Tantra says we all have limiting conditions, and what we do to overcome those conditions is inherently tantric practice. Some tantric practices are indeed very focused, very refined, very intentional. But now what it does is it takes advantage of this idea of the link between energy and mind. The import here is that we can use the mind's unique capacity for imagination to put image into action. That very aspect of putting image into action becomes very relevant. Why? Because it's image in action that starts to generate the mind's capacity to link to life force and to change our energetic landscape. This will all make a lot more sense if this is new to you when we come to this practice that I am now about to preview. But the idea here is that I'm going to shape my mind, perhaps giving it an image or something to focus on, and preferably one that is moving. I think it was Winston Churchill said, "The mind cannot rest The mind only wants what is new. And so part of the reason that I'm inserting this lesson after this long talk about samadhi is it would be fair to assume after that talk on samadhi that all we want to do is get the mind still, get the mind still, get the mind focused on something. And yet the reality is, as a meditator, you know that that's very challenging. The mind, Churchill wasn't wrong entirely. The mind doesn't want to be still. And so what if, and this is what Tantra proposes, and again, this is a bit of the preview to the practice that's coming. What if you move the mind in a way that had a positive effect on the mind? Simultaneously, let's say, internalizing the mind. You move the mind in a way along one of these energy channels or in an energy center, and a way that moved. By the way, we did a bit of this that first time where we were looking to the V and the light in the forehead or behind the forehead. But what if we did that? And as we're doing it, asking the mind not to be still, but the mind to move. To do that, the mind is automatically turning inward. It's also linking into a more subtle dimension of its a more subtle dimension of who and what we are. Typically, the mind is only aware of its own thoughts and feelings and the body. But as the mind becomes more sensitized to prana, it begins to quickly transform. And it becomes a conduit, a way of linking to higher reality. So we're going to use the mind's unique image-making capacity at times. Not all meditation techniques I'm going to recommend fall in this category, but this is a unique approach in order to create the highest level of integration and for a specific outcome. As we go along, and even before we're done with this module, but certainly in the next module, what you'll see is there's various components to the human being as seen by these ancient traditions that once you understand them, you become much more capable of addressing specific needs. We know the symptom of anxiety or depression, but that's just a symptom. What are the energetic phenomenon behind that? Clearly, there's also emotional, intellectual, historical background. But what's the energetics behind that? And how can we use the information of understanding these energetic principles so that we can more effectively resolve the symptom, which you could say is anxiety or depression or whatnot, for example, and that's just one example. But even is there an energetic condition that would be, is there an energetic enhancement that we could draw from to improve something like self-confidence? So that's where this tantric practice comes in, and it gives us an array of tools an array of tools that give us a kind of tangible way to link to the outcomes that we are seeking. Okay, so before we go any further, I just want to make this point one more time. The tantric practice says the mind does not want to stand still. The mind actually wants to move. Why not give it its desired outcome, which is to move, but to do it in such a way. To do it in such a way that it's going to have a positive effect on the mind. It's going to help collect the mind and perhaps even collect vital force. And so more and more what that happens is as we become more coherent, where we create a greater sense of coherence, then what occurs is we can more easily access the states and the ways of being that speak to us in general, that speak to our specific needs, right? Okay, the last thing I want to say, and I thought this is the place to do it, so let me just add one more kind of adjunct to this. In Tantra, there is a methodology, if you will, an approach that speaks to how we evolve stage to stage to stage. Now, it's essentially to convert, and I've spoken to this, but I want to now just do it explicitly. We convert our body mind orientation such that we begin to feel less as a body, less as a material entity, and we merge the body into energy. And that energy is brought into some greater level of balance or harmony. So this would be like, okay, so let's just say you've heard this, you've practiced it, you have some relationship to it, some association to, that there is a light within you that is the same light that lights the universe. This saying, for instance, of Jesus' Sermon on the Mount, let thy two eyes become one, and thy body shall be full of light. Okay? His words. His direct words. So, can I convert my body to see light, to experience light? Well, somehow the interim for that is collect your energy. So, merge the body into the field of energy. Next step, merge. And, the tools are clear. Asana, pranayama, energy awareness, this whole thing of connecting to not just energy awareness, but awareness itself, which is not a physical thing. Next is you merge energy with the mind. And so now we're developing the mind's ability to perceive, direct, collect, rest in vital force. We're developing awareness for sustaining that force, and we'll say now beginning to collect it in certain areas that have profound effect. All of this will make a lot more sense as we go along. I'm just giving you the principles right now. Now our practices would be inclusive. To develop this practice include visualization, concentration of energy flows, of mindfulness, of subtle sensation, even the bridge of gaps between breaths. And that will become a very profound technique that I will introduce in Module 2, the gap between breaths. Then the next step is once the mind has become purified and linked to subtle or life force, the mind can now begin to plumb the depths of itself and enter into a relation with the essential self. Now, there's a kind of inquiry into the distinction between the field of experience, whatever it might be, and the experiencer, as you've already been introduced. So now that experiencer is essential. That experiencer has been the same in you as it has ever been. This moment now, it will remain the same for the rest of your life. That essential self. But for the most part, we're going to suggest that there is a distinction between that essential self and the universal self. Remember in the earlier lesson, I talked about asmita. It's even beyond the self-identity. It is just the essence, because self-identity was an object. It is the experiencer. And finally, it is to merge the experiencer with consciousness itself. This is the final step. And I've been speaking about this a lot. I think for the point we are in this course and for this lesson, I won't speak any more to that. But this ultimately speaks to or addresses the concept of non-dual awareness, the culmination of the search for spiritual experience is your own being, because your own being is identical to the highest reality, the absolute, the essence of all things. Okay. Having said that, let's give you a practice. And this practice, I'd rather introduce it now before we move into it. Heart Kriya. I'm going to give you two different practices, two different heart kriyas. There's two different ways to meditate on the heart. In this course, you'll experience, I'll guide you through both. We'll insert them in different parts of the training. And initially now, this is employing the methodologies of Tantra that I just described to the degree that you can uncover, you can experience that essential self, your own essence. And we're going to do it by, as I said, moving the mind, linking the mind to energy. To move into the practice, I'm also going to do and guide you into a short pranayama practice. And whether you teach meditation separate from asana, yoga, or you teach it with, my recommendation, my strong recommendation is that more times than not, particularly if you are either working with someone or yourself, where you've come from a place of either significant distraction, emotional turmoil, or challenge, or you just find that you are dysregulated, to go straight to meditation is a pretty dramatic transition. You can make the transition, you can make the bridge to the meditative mind and to the practice of samyama, the stages of meditation, more seamlessly when you first do deliberate breathing. Okay, so again, just for the sake of repetition and the value of the course and training for you, please, I'll ask before you do this meditation to have done at least one of those 2 audio practices that I offered in which you guide yourself through the practice. And then, by all means, join me. And when you're done with the meditation, please take out your pen and paper and spend a little bit of time journaling on its effects, on why you think it works, and how it worked, and how or when you think this type of practice might be productive. Okay. Enjoy the meditation.